Okay, and I will go ahead and get started at least with our introductions because it's a big topic today. We have a lot to cover. We made the switch from in-person to online. We tried to shorten it because it's hard to sit still for a long time at the computer. But it's a big topic, so I don't want to delay too much. So as folks are still joining, um, welcome. This is, I think, the third in our transition to organic fundamentals of organic production series that we have sponsored by the Transition to Organic program along with NOFA Mass. So it's a collaboration with them, and wanted to mention that there's, in addition to these workshops, we'll be having some in-person field walks. The next one on the 27th is in-person greenhouse pest management, crop production and greenhouse at Atlas Farm in Deerfield. So that'll be exciting. Definitely getting a lot of questions from folks right now about how to do biocontrol in tunnels and greenhouses. So that'll be one of the main topics. And there's also some opportunities for technical assistance through this grant program. So if commercial farmers are interested in getting some additional one-on-one support with me or some of the other speakers, that's available. So there will be a survey at the end of this workshop, and you can sign up for those at that time. So I'll go ahead and introduce today's speaker is Evan Lentz, who is a relatively new extension specialist at UConn on small fruit and turns out tree fruit as well, all the fruits. So thank you so much to Evan for making the time to put together this in-depth workshop for us today. And without further ado, folks, if you want to put your questions in the chat as we go along, I will try to find the right moment to interrupt or not and get all of our questions asked. Hopefully we'll have a little bit of time at the end as well. And Evan will provide some resources where you can get more information if you need to dig a little deeper into any of these topics. So thanks again, and turn it over to Evan.
Great. Thanks so much, Sue. All right, so yeah, welcome everyone. We're going to be talking about some considerations for small fruit producers to grow organically. Now, just a disclaimer, I am not an organic expert. In fact, I don't know that much about the organic certification process or anything like that. But what I'm going to be presenting to you today is all based on integrated pest management. That's more my area of expertise. And through the IPM, I have left out the things, that you won't be able to do, which is mainly going to be some of your choices for chemical control. All right, so first we're going to do a little bit of an introduction and then a couple general recommendations that can help you get started. And then we're going to visit kind of our three main small fruit crops, blueberries, brambles, and strawberries. And we'll talk about, some IPM there, and then, we'll talk about some specific pests and how to address them. And then finally, we'll wrap up with what I think are going to be some critical resources, whether or not you are organic, certified organic, not certified, or conventional. So, yeah, we'll get started. So what does it mean to be organic? A lot of people ask me this, and it really depends on your plan, right? So to me, it means limited materials, in some cases, less effective materials, perhaps more expensive materials, limited practices, an emphasis on building soil health, water management. And again, it really depends on the plan that you set up for your own farm and get approved. So some challenges that are specific to fruit producers in particular are going to be, we're working with perennial crops here. So perennial cropping systems, those crops are out there year after year, accumulating stress. So we need to keep that in mind when we are producing and managing our pests. high initial investment. So some of these fruit crops, require either a lot of plant material or very expensive trellising equipment. But luckily, we do get a significantly high return on what we're growing. And then, of course, there's always an emphasis on fruit quality. So people are definitely going to be able to tell if your blueberries aren't as sweet as the ones next door. And of course, that may be a variety thing, but we can definitely help encourage and promote our fruit quality through different practices. So the take home here is it's much more challenging to produce fruit organically. And therefore, it's going to require some additional inputs from you. And those inputs are going to look different depending on what you're trying to do, but it's going to be time, labor, effort, and most importantly, could be seeking educational opportunities. All right, so knowledge is power here. My general recommendation for everyone, and I only have one, it is integrated pest management. So it's pretty holistic approach, and it's pretty broad. But here's kind of a typical triangle of IPM where we have our cultural practices on the bottom, physical, biological, and then lastly, coming to our chemical controls. So IPM is a holistic systems approach to managing pests. This is one that considers the entire life cycle of not only the crop, but also the pest, and then also, the environment in which we're growing in. Some principles of IPM, we always want to work towards preventing as much as we can. Most of your effort should be focused at the prevention stage because it's prevention. If we can prevent these things from happening in the first place, that's going to be our best bet. Identification. So again, this is coming down to education. Monitoring, we'll talk a little bit about how do we make decisions, so understanding our thresholds, and then what we're going to do to actually control. That doesn't mean a spray. We could be talking about cultural, mechanical, biological. And then again, we want to be aware of how these things are working from year to year. That's really, really important. So learning how to evaluate your own IPM program is going to be important. So as far as the components of IPM, again, this is usually the regular triangle here with our cultural on the bottom. I would add a couple layers here with education and prevention kind of being, on the bottom. And although mechanical and cultural controls can serve to be preventative, I really like to focus on the preventative ones, again, for the reasons we've mentioned. So this is probably what I would suggest be an IPM triangle, all right? So our education is going to be our foundation, all of our prevention, and then moving into our regular management practices, which are going to include our cultural, physical, biological, and chemical controls. And again, that last component, chemical, very small piece of the pie here. So, as an organic grower, when we're talking about our limitations and what we can actually do for chemical control, look at, all that you have to work with without the chemical control. All right, so we can be confident in our ability to manage pests and produce organically, just relying on these, with the understanding that, there may be some instances where we definitely need to turn to chemical control. As far as education, this includes things like this webinar here today, extension event, demonstrations, field guides, fact sheets, and conferences. Field guides like this are invaluable. This is really how I learned to get into IPM, just becoming familiar with everything that's out there, learning to ID it on site, and then taking advantage of our other resources. So something like the new strawberry production guide that just came out, this is going to have the most up-to-date, region-specific recommendations for you guys. So lots of information out there. Finally, I'll point out, we have the link down here, and I'll reference it multiple times today, our small fruit management guide. Our regional extension professionals have worked hard to distill all this information down for you. We've taken a lot of the guesswork out of it. So just knowing where to go for these answers is really going to help you. So the New England Small Fruit Management Guide is going to be your friend. We also have a tree fruit management guide. There's a vegetable one as well. All right, so as far as prevention, what am I thinking? Really comes down to site selection. If you are thinking about starting a new operation or expanding to a new field or something like that, evaluate your site, do a land evaluation, look at topography, look at groundwater, all of these things. Next, we're talking about varietal selection. All right. So we can pick varieties that are, well positioned and bred to perform well for us in our area. Ones that are resistant to diseases and ones that will give us high quality fruit. And then that brings us to kind of the third point of prevention here, and that's going to be managing stress. And this is really important because, again, we're working with perennial crops in most instances here, and they can acquire stress over the years. So if we can manage stress, our nutritive stress, our water stress, if we're keeping up on our crop load, if we're preventing winter injury, keeping our pH dialed in, these are all going to go a really, really long way in making sure that your plants are able to resist and endure any challenges that they face throughout the season. So for site selection, this is going to look pretty similar for all small fruit crops, okay? So full sun, more is always better. Well-drained soils, avoiding windy sites, avoiding low areas and heavy clay soils. So well-drained soils and avoiding heavy clay soils, we're thinking about drainage in our groundwater. Windy sites, low areas, we're thinking about frost pockets. So frost pockets can be challenging, especially given the last year that we had and all the devastation that May 18th kind of brought to our fruit growers. So keeping these things in mind, when we are actually planting is going to go a long way. I would say that a frost pocket, just because you don't have a low-lying area, you can have a frost pocket on a high elevation, that's really flat if there isn't enough wind to move that cold air. So again, just be kind of aware of that. But site selection, that's your first. Next, we're talking about variety selection. Now, this is a chart of blueberry varieties and then some of the traits, of course, that we're breeding for. And there will be tables like this in the New England Management Guide. They're going to be more extensive. So here are our three main traits that we're always breeding for: size, firmness, and flavor. All right, so our fruit quality. But then, of course, we also have varieties that vary based on when they bloom and when they fruit. And then also we're considering disease resistance as well. So using a chart like this, we can make informed decisions, not only about, what fruit to satisfy or what fruit is going to be able to satisfy our customers, but, maybe we're staying away from very late varieties because we've historically had a problem with spotted wing Drosophila, or maybe we're picking resistant varieties because we have challenges with mummyberry. Again, all of this guesswork has been done for you, and all you need to do is really refer to these resources. Here's some strawberry varieties as well. Again, the same three factors that we're interested in: size, firmness, and flavor. And then once we satisfy these, we can move and look at some of these other traits that we're interested in. So resistance to different diseases. All right, now we're talking about managing stress. All right, so how do we manage these different types of stressors? For our nutrition and pH, that comes down to soil testing and utilizing foliar tests. All right, if you're using these in combination every single year, there's really no excuse for making an uninformed nutrient or pH decision. For water, we're thinking about irrigation. What are going to be our irrigation needs? What's the drainage of our site? If we do have a wet site, we can certainly utilize raised beds for some of our crops as well. For managing crop load, that comes down to pruning, annual pruning. This is going to be done every single year and should be done without fail. This is not only to manage our crop load, but this is going to go a really long way in managing our pests. For something like June-bearing strawberries, proper renovation is going to go a long way in managing our crop load. And then, of course, again, just dialing in that nutrition. Winter injury, so looking at, again, protection, if that's straw mulch, if that's row covers, and then again, just making sure that our plants are getting the nutrition that they want. So when we're managing our nutritive stress or our pHs, we should be doing our soil tests every 3 years, unless you're making large applications or you're trying to correct large swings. In that case, you could move down to 1 to 2 years and still until things stabilize. But other than that, things don't change that quickly in the soil environment usually. So every 3 years shouldn't be, that hard to kind of keep up on. Foliar analysis, this should be done every year. And this is really the best tool that we have in figuring the true nutrient status of our plants. Because a nutrient deficiency isn't always a true nutrient deficiency. So we can have a true nutrient deficiency where, there just isn't not enough of that nutrient in the soil available to our plants. We could have an induced deficiency. So this chart over here. Some nutrients are similar in size and charge, so they get mistaken for one another. And when you apply one nutrient in an excess, it can cause the reduced uptake of another. So that's another cause of a deficiency. So you might have enough of that, nutrient in the soil, but if you have too much of, say, potassium, that might be restricting the uptake of your calcium and magnesium. We could also not have enough water to actually move some of these nutrients to our plants. And then finally, our pH. Is our pH in an acceptable range for our plants to actually be happy? So for tissue sampling, here's a little cutout from a guide from Penn State, and this just outlines when you should be taking your tissue analyses for different crops. So plastic culture strawberries right around first bloom. We're looking at floricane fruiting raspberries between August 1st and August 20th. For blueberries, end of harvest. Again, all this information is out there for you. And when you do submit a tissue sample to your lab, what they're going to do is give you the range that is acceptable, and you'll be able to tell, if your soil test results and your foliar test results are matching up. If they are matching up, great. If they aren't, then we want to consider some of those other reasons, why there might be an imbalance between what the soil test is saying and what the foliar test is saying.
Evan, when you're talking about this foliar testing, is that the same as what people call SAP analysis?
So that will be a little bit different. So the SAP is analysis of the actual SAP. The tissue sampling will be collection of leaves. So these are going to usually be the most recently expanded mature leaves. You don't want older leaves, you don't want young leaves, and those are going to give you the best best representation of what's going on in your plant. If we're talking about grapes, we actually use the petiole from the leaves. And grapes, you can collect those samples at bloom or veraison for those grape growers that are here. But yeah, just a little bit different than SAP, but pretty much the same principle. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yep. All right, so managing water stress. All right, so we have some options here. We should always be trying to make sure that we have the ability to irrigate our crops. If we never turn it on, that's perfectly fine. But that 1 week that you need it, it's going to be worthwhile. So I recommend all my growers to have the option to irrigate their crops whenever they need to. Drainage, again, this comes down to site selection. And again, if you have existing plants already planted and you're worried about your drainage, then you want to consider something like actually installing some drainage, some tile drainage, reaching out to NRCS, who might be able to help you fund a project like that. It's exactly what they're there to do. Raised beds, certainly for brambles or strawberries. There are other alternatives for strawberries as well, like this tabletop system. You could even go as far as using protected culture over a tabletop system like this, or planting strawberries in the ground in a hoop house. Just keeping, the moisture off the leaves is going to go a long way for control of foliar issues. And then I just wanted to point out this flow control drip tape. So if you are irrigating, on, in a hilly area, you could run into a problem like this where the plants at the bottom of your hill are actually receiving more water than the ones at the top of your hill. So, there are plenty of flow control drip tapes too out there. So if you're still finding, some imbalances, between your plants while you're irrigating, I would recommend checking out some flow control drip tape. All right, and crop load. For small fruit, that really comes down to pruning. We don't use any PGRs or anything like that like we do with tree fruit. So crop load comes down to pruning, annual pruning, and this is done for all of our small fruit crops. For June-bearing strawberries, renovation is what we do to manage crop load and to manage our growing area. We'll talk about that a little bit more later on. And then again, just always highlighting the nutrition, the role of nutrition in setting fruit and getting good size, good quality fruit. Winter entry. So there are a few options depending on what you're growing and kind of what your operation looks like. But if you're growing strawberries, we definitely want to have winter mulching or row covers to protect them. If we get snow cover, that's even better. That helps to insulate them. Brambles, here we can see these canes have been dried out from winter wind. So if you are thinking about planting some brambles, they are sensitive to desiccation and winter injuries. So you might want to pick a protected area or consider something like a windbreak. If you're doing blackberries, you could entertain the use of swing arm trellis, which actually lays down these plants for the winter time, and then you would come in and cover these with row covers as well. Requires a little bit more finesse and effort on your part, but this is a really sophisticated trellising system. So now we'll get into blueberries, and we're going to kind of run through this 1, 2, 3 for each of the small fruit crops. So talk about site selection and preparation, then get into cultural management, and then wrap up with a little bit of IPM. All right, so here we have potassium deficiency. And again, I'm just circling back around to what are the potential causes of this deficiency. So we know that these are deficiency symptoms, but is it a true deficiency? Is it a pH issue? Is it a water issue? I will tell you that, maybe 7 out of 10 times when there's a blueberry issue that isn't a pest issue, it comes down to a pH imbalance. It's really easy for people to, dial in their pH one year and then completely forget about it. But in any case, this deficiency was due to a pH imbalance. All right, so for blueberries in particular, we're aiming for 4.8. That is our ideal pH if you can dial it in that much, and I'm confident that you can. But if you can't dial it in yet, within the range of 4.5 to 5 is going to be preferred. When we talk about nutrition, again, we're using our soil test to inform our application. Blueberries use ammonium as a form of nitrogen, so just make sure that we're actually using the type of nitrogen that they're going to be able to take up. So not all of these are organic, but you can use just a general berry mix for blueberries. It's perfectly fine, or an acid-loving mix. But again, just make sure that it's organic and that it works for your system. We do want to be really careful that we do not apply any nitrogen after June or early July. And that's so that we can slow down our growth and allow our tissues to harden off in time for the winter time. If you are fertilizing too late, you're just going to predispose them to damage, which is going to impact your crop for years to come. Now you can do a split application as well. 1/2 right after bud swell, and then 1 right after petal fall. Blueberries have 2 distinct vegetative growth cycles, one when they're coming out of dormancy, and then another one begins right after harvest is completed. So making sure our plants have that nutrition available. So here are some general maintenance rates for nitrogen for blueberries, and I'm not too worried about the numbers, but I just want to show you that, as these plants grow, they're going to need much more nitrogen applied year after year. So, I just like to say, keep that in mind. Now, pruning. Pruning has a ton of benefits. Consistent cropping, this balance between vegetative and reproductive growth, maintaining the overall health and vigor of a plant, increased berry size, increased fruit bud development, and then, of course, managing pests. Now, this is a picture of a blueberry bush here, completely inundated with fruit, and this is what you want every single year. This is absolutely what you can get every single year. But again, this is what we're going for here. And through annual pruning, we can ensure that our plants are, this successful every single year. When we're doing our pruning, we certainly want to focus all of our efforts during the dormant season, with very, very few exceptions. In years 1 to 3 for blueberries, we want to remove all flower buds, all broken, diseased, weak wood. We want to really redirect that growth towards establishing a root system and vegetative growth and getting our plants set up. For years 3 onward, this is the recipe that you should be sticking to and not deviating from at all. 2 to 3 canes per 1 year of growth. No canes older than 6 years. So if we do the math, that gives us around 18 canes per plant. And research has shown that after 6 years, these canes become much less productive. So every year, once you get these 18 canes set up, you just go in, you remove the 2 to 3 oldest ones, and you leave 2 to 3 new ones. So I like this picture because it shows the diversity of canes that we're going to have on, producing plant at any time. So we have our older ones, we have some newer ones, and then we have ones that have just come up this year. So we should be getting significant shoot generation from the base of our plants every single year. All right. And you don't want to leave them all. You just want to leave 2 to 3, just like we removed 2 to 3. But if you are not getting new shoots that are generating from the base of your plants every single year, then it's either a pH issue or it's a nutrition or a nitrogen issue. All right. So if you're not getting new shoots, those are your 2 culprits. Might be a combination of the 2. When we are pruning, we want to only do thinning cuts. We don't do any heading cuts for blueberries, okay? We remove the canes all the way down to the base. And the reason that is because when we have a new cane coming from an old cane, that new cane is restricted by all of that old wood. So it's going to perform just as poorly as that old wood. So here's a little before and after. Showing a density that is a little bit more appropriate. Again, introducing airflow and light into that area. Sunlight's going to be able to get down in there, stimulate flower bud formation for next year, and our air will serve to dry out this area and reduce our disease potential. So this is a list of different pests that afflict our blueberries. This is by no means an exhaustive list, but these are some of the biggest culprits, at least in my opinion, and we'll just talk about a couple. So birds, all right, #1 blueberry pest without question. And you have 2 options. You can either scare them away or you can physically exclude them. Nothing else is going to work. So there are some less sophisticated options. Some of these reflective materials can serve to distract or deter birds. We do have these predator mimics, which according to some of my growers work very, very well. They have some of these kites now that mimic predators as well, which work really well. If you have raptors in the area, these can go a long way in kind of managing the behavior of your local birds. But again, everyone might not have them. The other thing, and my recommendation is going to be actually to physically exclude them. So looking at something like bird netting. Of course, most commercial growers are going the route of a system like this, where they roll it up and unroll it every single year. And of course, this is the best way to do it. But if you don't have, the time or the funds to do this, that's perfectly fine. We could throw this bird netting over the top of our bushes when we see our fruit starting to change color. And then, you would remove that, harvest, and then those plants would pop back up. So you could be a little bit less sophisticated about it if you needed to be. If you're on a really small scale, Amazon has basically individual like zip up bags for bird netting, which can work as well too. So if you just have a few, it's much easier to manage than these big giant rolls of netting. All right, that brings us to mummyberry. Now, all these pages that I list after the pests are going to be from an APS field guide, which I'll link at the end. But it's a guide that I give to everyone in my small fruit production course, and I think it's a pretty great resource. So that's what these page numbers are, if you are wondering. But again, I'll link that at the end. All right, mummyberry, number one blueberry disease, blue ray, which is a very popular variety. It's highly susceptible. Infections occur in the springtime, and this disease has primary and secondary disease cycles. Here we have some of our mummified berries. These mummies drop to the ground, over the winter or late in the fall, and then they produce these little cups, which will release spores, which will then serve to infect our plants in the next year. If we broke this open, we can see that the berry is fully colonized with mycelium. All right, so yep, like I mentioned, it overwinters as mummies on the ground. Cool, rainy weather favors spore release. And these spores can be moved by wind, rain, bees as well. But it's the young succulent tissues that initially get infected. The spores come up here, and then we get a shoot blight that starts to occur. Now, this chart just shows the different factors going into this disease. So wetness, time, and temperature. All right, so those are our three factors for most of our fungal pathogens that factor into, how severe this disease might be, or if it's even going to be an issue. Again, so just educating ourselves on these disease and, understanding where we or when we are in our high risk areas and times and when we're not. So here are some symptoms to help you ID. This is an early shoot infection. It's just about 2 weeks after a spore has landed on. This is our typical oak leaf pattern that we can expect to see. It starts at the petiole, works its way down the midrib, and then out from there. And then this is a little bit more advanced of a shoot strike. But again, being able to ID what pests you have are going to go a long way. Here are some older shoot strikes with spore masses, and this is where the secondary disease cycle begins. So, these shoot strikes will start to generate new spores, which will then go on and infect our flowers. Once it gets into the flowers, they will infect the fruit, and then again, that serves to reinfect for next year. All right. Yep, so that's just another. All right.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah, sure. Go right ahead.
So if you notice these things, would you recommend pruning them out, or like if there are a lot of berries that fell to the ground because of infection, would you recommend removing those as well?
Yeah, definitely. So, we're
Okay,
going to
sorry,
talk
I jumped
about.
ahead.
Yeah, no, yeah. No, but that's exactly where I'm going. That's a good question. So I'm pointing out these things because it's an opportunity for control. So, as far as management is concerned, the number one thing that you can do is avoid susceptible varieties. So I have some listed here. So if you're growing these are going to be susceptible to mummyberry. And then here we have some resistant varieties. Okay, so here we have. So I mentioned we have two phases of the disease cycle. We have the shoot strikes and then the fruit infections. So resistance to each of these phases is different in different varieties, surprisingly enough. So here are some resistant and moderately resistant varieties to the shoot strike, so the initial infection. And I starred a few here that are repeated in the next phase of the disease cycle resistance as well. But blue jay is highly resistant to both phases of the disease cycle. So that might be a really good option for some people wanting to, start. This is the fruit infection susceptibility resistant chart. Again, Chippewa showing up again, blue jay, Duke, and Grover. So we do have plenty of options for resistance, and I think that at least some of these are going to be able to fit into your plan. So that's the beginning of our IPM plan, all right? Starting out with these good varieties, pruning for better air circulation. If we're keeping up on our pruning every single year, making sure that we don't have that wetness period that is required for these spores to germinate on the tissue can help. Sanitation, so removing infested berries or shoots when we see them. Forsythia. All right, so I point this out because Forsythia bloom right around the same time that those spores mature and begin to release. So all you need to do every single year to deal with this disease is cover those mummies that have fallen down to the ground with 2 inches of mulch. Now, we should be mulching annually for other reasons anyways, and this is just an added benefit. So we're just physically covering up those mummies and preventing them from reinfecting. All right, if we keep up on our weed management, again, allowing airflow through our canes. If you have a really, really bad infestation here, you can apply early spring urea to the ground. That helps to burn off those fruiting structures. And then, again, our last resort is going to be fungicides from bud break to bloom to prevent, that flower infection. But everything we presented so far before getting to the fungicides, we can completely manage this disease by just cultural management, picking the right varieties, keeping up on our pruning, and then applying that annual mulch, and you won't have a problem. But again, it comes down to you actually knowing, what this disease is and how to go about controlling it. All right, and this brings us to blueberry maggot. So this is one of our big blueberry pests. This is a, fruit fly, has only 1 generation per year, which is pretty manageable on its own. It overwinters in the soil, emerges mid-June to early August. These flies lay their eggs in the fruit, and then of course it develops inside, starts to eat out the fruit, and our fruit becomes unmarketable. Really easy to ID this pest. If it's on blueberries, it's blueberry maggot. If you see it around your apples, then it's probably apple maggot. Cultivar choice, all right, again, so some of our pre-work, choosing early cultivars may escape the damage of this pest just due to the emergence time. And then the other thing we want to do is trap for this pest. So when we're thinking about insects, we have all of these great pheromone lures and traps that we can utilize to help us inform our decisions and make really strategic applications when we need to. So this one relies on an ammonia-baited yellow sticky trap. We put it in the V formation and hang it in the top third of the canopy. Remove the fruit and foliage within 8 inches just so you can kind of get a good feel of what's going on with your pests. And then you could use this in a couple of different ways. So you could use these traps just to trap out the adults, so physically trapping them there, and then therefore they're not flying around and laying their eggs. Or we can utilize a NUA forecast model. And again, this is going to be one of those resources that I present at the end. The NUA website is a weather station website, has a bunch of pest forecasting models that we've helped developed over the years. But if you utilize your trap and the forecasting model, this model is going to tell you exactly when to go out there and apply your chemical control if we get to that point, and if it's a big enough issue for you. So again, this also comes down to what's a acceptable level of damage, for your operation. This is what the degree day model would look like. And again, it's taking into consideration, the time of the year, your location, and, based on degree days, it'll tell you if you're at high risk for infestation or if it's too early to even be considering control for this pest again. So just making informed decisions and using the tools that we have available to us. The threshold for these traps, you don't have to use a pheromone lure or an ammonia lure with this. You could just hang it up there. In that case, it would be 1 adult per trap. That would be your threshold. If you are using the lure or the bait, it's also called bait, that would be 6 per trap. And then you could consider an insecticide within 7 to 10 days of first capture. All right, so now we're going to move on to brambles. I didn't know if anyone had any questions about blueberries. And again, I'm just showing you kind of what an IPM process might look like for some of our important pests, but this might be a good time to pause if there are any questions.
One question I had was, you talked about the pH, which is a lot lower than many other crops we might be growing. How do you recommend people lower the pH?
Yeah, lowering pH is going to be done with sulfur, a sulfur product, elemental sulfur. So lime raises, sulfur lowers our pH.
Thanks.
Yep.
And then as far as the timing of release of the spores of the mummyberry with the forsythia, how can you use that information to make a management decision, maybe?
Yeah, so it's a pretty charismatic example, but if you notice forsythia are blooming in your area and you haven't gotten your 2 inches of mulch down, you better, kick it into high gear and get out there and mulch. So the timing roughly matches up with spore maturation, and then they would be released. So it's not super precise, but it just gives you kind of a reminder every year. Now you could put down the mulch earlier, much earlier, as soon as the snow cover is gone too. Or you could also go out in your blueberries and pick off the mummies that you see too to prevent them from falling down. But yeah, it really is just kind of a reminder.
I don't see any other questions, so.
Okay, perfect. So we're going to move on to brambles. And again, we're going to do the same thing, site selection prep, some cultural management recommendations, and then we'll go through IPM for a few of our pests. All right, starting off right off the bat, do not plant brambles where you've had solanaceous crops grown in the last 4 to 5 years. And that is due to verticillium wilt, the potential of that being in the soil. Soil-borne pathogens are a real pain in the butt to deal with. We have limited management. So again, if we can avoid these issues altogether, that would be best, especially in an organic system. For brambles in particular, weed control is essential. A lot of our brambles colonize via rhizomes, so it's much harder to get in there and hand cultivate amongst all these thorny canes compared to something like a blueberry, which has a really nice compact crown. So doing pre-plant weed control and then of course annual weed control as well. Do not let it get to a point like this where weeds are just as tall as your canes. All right, this is going to favor spotted wing Drosophila, fungal pathogens, rust, all of this, not so great stuff. Mammals will overwinter in this area during the winter time and feed on your roots and your shoots. So weed control is essential for all of our fruit crops. But if there ever was one that you don't want to forget, it would be brambles. All right, so again, the fertilizer recommendations are going to be based on your soil tests and your foliar analysis. Our lab at UConn gives you specific recommendations based on the crop that you're growing. So again, you don't even have to leave and think about, oh, I'm low on potassium, how much should I apply? No, you don't have to worry about that. We tell you exactly how much to apply. All right, if you have heavier fertile soils, you can put it all on at once. All right, we're not worried about leaching. If you have a sandier soil, you want to split it up, again, just to make sure that we're not leaching and wasting our materials. You can certainly go the route, and I will say, of compost. It's perfectly fine for fruit production. I would say that you need to get it from a reputable source, or you need to be getting your compost tested. So our soil testing lab also tests compost, and it can tell you exactly how much organic matter you're applying and things like that. So just making informed decisions again. If you're growing brambles, you're going to need some sort of support system, with the exception of maybe some erect blackberry cultivars. But here I'm just highlighting a few choices. We have our T trellising, we have a V trellis, and I love this picture because you can look right down the center here and look how open that is, all right? We're going to be getting plenty of airflow, plenty of light penetration, and this is exactly what we're looking for. All of our fruiting canes are off to the side, supported by those wires, and then this allows for our primicanes to come up right in the center and get plenty of light. So there are plenty of options here. You can get a little bit more sophisticated if you want to build something a little bit more permanent, that's fine. If you don't, you can use some metal posts with string and redo this every year. So there's definitely an option for you. All right, summer fruiting brambles. So we have two different types of brambles as far as when they fruit and how they fruit. We have summer fruiting varieties. Our primicanes are vegetative canes. So our primicanes are our 1-year-old canes. They're vegetative, they won't fruit. They arise either from the crown or the roots, depending on what type of bramble that we're growing. And then in the second year, those primicanes become floricanes. They become sexually mature, they will flower, they will fruit. All right, so for summer fruiting brambles, canes are biennial, so 2 years to complete their life cycle, then they get removed. And within this group, we have red, purple, and black raspberries, and then also blackberries. So for pruning red and yellow raspberries, and again, I'm pointing this out because this is important not only for cultural and production, but for pest management as well. Red and yellow raspberries. All right, so our first summer, we have our new growth. These are our primicanes, all right? They are not going to flower or fruit. We're going to leave those until they become mature in the second year. We're going to come in the springtime and shorten those canes to our top wire. This is going to encourage the formation of lateral branches, and that's where our fruit production is going to be. That second year, we remove all those floricanes. Now, what's not shown in this picture right now is all of the primicanes that came up this year. So that's why we have this note here that you're going to have primicanes, floricanes, and old stumps present at the same time. But again, we're just following the life cycle of a single cane here. So the other thing that we want to do when we're pruning, not just removing our spent floricanes, but we also want to thin out all of our canes, all of our new canes to 4 to 5 canes per linear foot. So this is what it's going to look like, and it might look really thin, but that's okay. This is going to fill in, this is going to flesh out perfectly fine. So if it looks thin, that's fine. Just go with it and have a little bit of faith. During this time, you could also think about narrowing your row width too, if you've had, some of the suckers kind of come out of the growing area. But again, this is going to go a long way to help reduce disease instance, and then also reduce the preferred environment for the dreaded spotted wing Drosophila. So this is just an example, of a year of growth. So don't be afraid to get in there and really whack these things back when you do the pruning and the thinning. So the pruning for our black and purple raspberries is going to be just a little bit different than our red and yellows. All right, so in that first summer, we have our primicanes. We tip those right away to encourage lateral formation in that first year. In that second year, these are now floricanes. We'll want to shorten those laterals. These laterals can get 10, 15 feet long. So we just want to help manage our crop load that way. And then, later on in that year, these laterals are going to fruit and they're going to flower and fruit, and then we'll remove those down to the base. Again, what's not shown here is those primicanes that came up in this second year too. So again, you're going to have primicanes and floricanes out at the same time. Now, we also have fall-bearing brambles. So they're a little bit different in their pruning. Fall-bearing brambles will give you fruit on the 1-year-old canes. So they are primicane-bearing brambles. So this is what the culture might look like first summer. These primicanes come up. Later on that fall, they're going to give us our first crop. So if we stop right here, that's perfectly fine. We can come in and we can mow these down to the ground, and then we start over every single year. I have a few growers that do that. It's a really great way to kind of just start fresh every single year. And this is a great time to have raspberries. Just make sure that you have, something else on your farm to draw people there. However, you do have the option to double crop these fall bearing brambles. So this is what it would look like. That first summer, that first fall, you get that crop. You'd come in and you'd remove, that spent fruiting area. And then early that second summer, you would get your second crop. Immediately after harvest, you would remove those floricanes. So this requires a little bit more effort, but you can get two crops out of, a single cane when you are growing fall bearing brambles. So now we'll talk about pest management. Again, here are some highlights, and we'll just talk about a couple. Our number one bramble disease is botrytis or gray mold. It's ubiquitous, it's everywhere. If your fruit touches the ground, it's going to get gray mold. This overwinters on foliage, twigs, and soil organic matter, so in your compost. And here we have some overwintering sclerotia. So if you see things like this when you're pruning, make sure to hit and remove these canes. But again, it could, just overwinter on old fruit or leaves as well. So wet weather and high relative humidity favors this disease. And management is really a combination of, different cultural practices. So the first thing we can do is keep the fruit off the soil. If we have an adequate trellising system, then we really shouldn't be, having our fruit come into contact with the soil, which is great. Promoting air circulation, so just keeping up on our annual pruning is already going to help us with this air circulation, help to dry out our tissues, really prevent the favorable conditions, okay? Avoid over-fertilization. So we don't want to encourage too much green succulent growth. Again, that would just increase the density of our canopies and prevent airflow and drying. If we're watering, we want to make sure that we are only watering at the base. Again, thinking about those conditions that we need for this disease to present. Sanitation. So if we see things like this, remove them from your orchard. Remove them from your orchard, destroy them, burn them, bury them, whatever works for you. But sanitation goes a long way in reducing the inoculum. And, I just put prune, prune, prune. All right. So if you're keeping up on your pruning, I keep saying this, you shouldn't really be running into severe issues, with diseases like this. Weeds. Again, I'll just talk about weeds for a minute. So weeds are challenging because they harbor, our insect pests, our diseases. They impede that airflow that we've been talking about. And then during the winter time, something like this is perfect for, a mouse or something to hang out in, be warm, find some food and gnaw on and destroy your canes. So just keep that in mind. When we're thinking about management, again, all of your effort or most of your effort should be focused pre-plant. All right. So that means hand weeding, solarization, chemical control potentially as well. But again, if you really focus those efforts early on and you keep up on the annual cultivation, that's really, really going to go a long way and help you here. All right, that brings us to spotted wing Drosophila. This is our number one bramble pest. I don't have to tell you about this too much. But it is a generalist, but it does prefer brambles over everything else. The main issue with this pest is that we have multiple generations per year. So our populations are really driven by degree days and the length of our season and available food sources. So if we're growing later varieties, not keeping up on our harvesting, things like that, we can really see these populations swell later on in the year. So this pest prefers a cool, shady, moist location. So if you think about our dense canopies right here, this is exactly where this pest wants to be hanging out. And, it's got its food source, it's got, an area to lay its eggs. So it's really never going to leave this area. This pest you must monitor for, all right? Especially if you want to control for it. You don't have to control for it. You just have a reduced fruit quality. Some people don't care about having these worms in their fruit. There's no harm done. But most people certainly, want to work towards preventing, major outbreaks. So for managing for this pest, first thing that we can do is harvest frequently. Now, I know this might not be an option for pick your own operations, but you could direct or control the picking of your customers to certain areas to make sure that areas get picked out. And then you aren't leaving overripe fruit on your plants, which is only going to serve to invite, more pests in. Sanitation. So if you find infested fruit, remove it, destroy it. An easy way to tell if a raspberry has a larvae in it is to pull it off the plant. You look in the center, and if there's any moisture in the center, even a little drop, then you know that there's been some damage and that there's likely a larva in there. You could also crush these up in a salt water or sugar water solution, and the larvae would float to the surface. But you would want to make use of the monitoring traps that are available. So we have these cup traps, which we would put fruit juice in or drowning solution, apple cider vinegar, something like that. And then you'd have to strain it with cheesecloth. I prefer the sticky traps. So right now from Great Lakes IPM, we're using a red sticky trap with a lure. And you could use these traps in a couple of different ways. So you can certainly trap them out, or at least help to reduce their populations. Or you can use these traps to help inform your application of insecticide. Pruning, again, is going to go a long way to reduce and modify the preferred environment of this pest. So introducing light and airflow and warmth into that area is going to make it uninhabitable for them. There is exclusion netting that you can use too, but not well suited to pick your own operations. You really need to keep an eye on that double door, and then trapping as I've mentioned. So here we have just a repeat of the gray mold. So a little bit closer up here, we can see some of these overwintering structures, on our stems here. Again, just keeping these things in mind when you're pruning. A little bit of a closer view. All right. And then the other thing with gray mold is that, we want to make sure that we're identifying the actual pest that we're interested in. So for something like this, compare this to anthracnose. And although, when we're close up like this, they don't look exactly the same. Anthracnose kind of has this bird eye, marks here. But again, I'm just pointing out is when you become familiar with the key ID features of all these pests and diseases, it becomes really easy to determine what it is you're actually dealing with. And again, just pointing out some of the differences between the symptoms of these. So for botrytis, there really is no threshold for this disease, and you really want to focus your efforts on scouting during the season. And if you see a gray mold, then of course it is botrytis. We want to look for those overwintering sclerotia, remove them when we can, keep the fruit off the soil, promote good air circulation. Again, avoid nitrogen watering, sanitation, and fungicides. It looks like things got a little out of order here. I apologize. All right, so does anyone have any questions on anything that we mentioned for the brambles?
There was a question about organic fungicides, especially biofungicides, like bacteria or fungi that might be antagonistic to the pathogens. Is there any research to support any of those products?
So without knowing which specific ones we're talking about, I would refer you to the New England Management Guide. So in addition to all of these charts that I've shared with you, the main dish that is provided through that management guide are spray tables. So those spray tables are corresponding to your specific crop and then your specific phenological stage, and then also your specific pest. So those charts are going to outline which materials are OMRI listed. It will also provide rates. It will also provide, whether or not it's restricted use. It will also provide any other tips that are required for applying it. So if you have questions about the efficacy of something, that efficacy is going to be explicitly rated in the New England Management Guide. So the extension professionals have already, taken all that research that's been, out there and approved, and condensed that information into these spray tables where we actually rate each one of these materials at how effective they are at controlling these different pests. So again, the guesswork is taken out of it for you. And again, there are plenty of OMRI listed materials in those spray tables as well. And if we have time at the end, I'll take you to that site and just show you a couple of those tables.
Okay, there were two more questions. One, if you were growing in high tunnels, would there be anything different?
Yeah, high tunnels. So in high tunnels, you can go a little bit closer on your row spacing. In the main benefit there is, we are excluding some of that moisture and helping to reduce our disease pressure. As far as management, you want to keep up on your pruning and whatever trellising system that you're using inside the greenhouse. And then, however high your high tunnel is would inform your pruning practices. So like where you would tip and things like that. But otherwise, it's going to be fairly similar to doing it in non-protected culture system as well.
You just make sure you're keeping up on the watering
Yep.
there as well.
Yeah,
And then
exactly.
a last question about mulching brambles. How do you recommend people do that? What should they use, etc.?
Yeah, so most often we see wood chips being used. And again, this is just to help with kind of weed and water management. As far as other materials, sawdust I hear is recommended, but I don't know any of my growers that are using sawdust in particular. So wood chip mulch has kind of been the classic recommendation.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. All right, so we'll take a little journey now through strawberries again, the same kind of flow that we've been going through. So for mulching strawberries, this is incredibly important, for a few different reasons: weed management, water management, disease management. But for strawberries, we're mostly interested in preventing winter injury. Again, just coming back to managing our stress. In the springtime, when you uncover your strawberries, with the straw mulch, that goes right in the aisle here, which is just fantastic because that helps to keep our fruit off the soil, that helps to keep our weeds down, that helps to just keep a neat and orderly picking area if you're having pick your own. So it's really, really important, that we are making sure that we're mulching our strawberries. And then when we're picking a material, we only want to use straw. We want to stay away from hay, and that's just because hay is more often than not going to have a ton of weed seeds in it. Even if you are picking straw, it's really important to have a reputable source. Ask a neighbor where they get their straw, because you can have some propagules or weed seeds that end up in straw as well, but certainly not as often as hay. You also have the option of plastic culture. Now, I don't know all of the details about what is approved and not approved for organic production, but I just present this here as a way to kind of deal with some of our disease pressure. So here we have some June-bearing strawberries and some day neutrals, and you can see their fruit is actually off of the soil. So lower potential for things like botrytis to move in here and infect our fruit. And again, I'm sorry, I don't know more of the details on plastic culture or plastic mulches and the relation to organic production, but it is an option. Raised beds. So strawberries are a great candidate for raised beds, especially if you have a wet area and you're concerned if you have limited space. throw in a raised bed. You can do strawberry production in raised beds, no problem. You can do bramble production in raised beds as well. Both of those crops, actually, all three of the crops that we're talking about today have very shallow root systems around a foot maximum. So, planting in a raised bed is going to raise that entire root system right out of your wet area. And then you can have full production in an area that might get saturated. Additionally, if you're using raised beds with brambles, that can help to control the suckers by preventing them from spreading out of the growing area. So it might have a double benefit there. But just some options for you. For strawberries, just because they are smaller, have shallower root systems, and they aren't as perennial as our other two crops that we've talked about, there are other options for growing these. Now, these are kind of more of a homeowner scale, but it just shows you the versatility. But you can do something like a tiered tabletop, or a tabletop covered with protected culture, something like that. But just presenting some options. And again, some more. All right. So row covers. Row covers are an option too for protection against late spring frosts. Now, I know this isn't really pest management per se, but if you have a brown flower, you're certainly not going to get a fruit. And if you do get a fruit, it is going to be this malformed, partially pollinated fruit. So you might want to consider just having row covers available to you if you don't have some other form of frost protection, overhead irrigation, and things like that. And if you do have a frost coming, you could store these in the aisles and then just make sure to cover them and uncover them to encourage pollination as well. So for nutrition, again, same type of thing, soil tests every 3 years, focusing on nitrogen, and then, whatever formulation you're using, hopefully is bringing those other macronutrients as well. So we would fertilize 4 to 6 weeks after planting with a slow release or a compost, and then again 30 to 40 pounds in late August. All right, you'll notice a third arrow here, which is actually when we do renovation for our June bearing strawberries. If we're not familiar with renovation, this is what renovation is. It's going from something like this to something like this. So June bearing strawberries runner very easily, and we take advantage of that to create our matted row system. We want those daughter plants, we want those extra fruiting points. What renovation is thinning and mowing of our plants. So we want to come over the top of our plants with a mower and mow them, around 2 inches in height. And that's going to get rid of all of our old, perhaps diseased leaves, introduce light and air to our crowns, help to stimulate and set ourselves up for a good crop next year. This will also help encourage the formation of branch crowns, which again are just new flowering and fruiting points on your plants. We do this for consistent crop, for pest management, and then just maintaining the overall health of our plants. So you can have these plants out there for 5 years producing, and as long as we're doing a good job at renovating year after year, we should have no problems. During this time, you also want to get rid of all the runners that have spread out into your aisles here. So cleaning those up. And then this is also a great time to focus on some weed control. So if you do have approved materials that you can use, this is a great time to apply those as well, because you're really opening up the canopy and the whole growing area. And when we are applying those chemicals, we want to make sure that we're applying them in a way that they can be most effective. So this is a great time to do that as well. So for winter care, again, we've talked about it, but just getting a little bit more specific, our strawberry plants will suffer damage to their crowns at 20 degrees. So that's not uncommon at all in our area. In fact, it's very common. So, this should show that we would definitely need winter protection. And again, this is what we're looking for. our plants are, in more or less a holding pattern underneath here. And again, if we get some nice snowfall, that only serves to insulate our plants more. We want to cover when our temperatures are below 40 degrees Fahrenheit consistently, or when our soil temperatures are below 40 degrees for about 3 days. And that information we can get from the NUA website that I mentioned earlier too. And here's just a picture. This probably got uncovered by this mulch a little bit too early and, zapped our plant right down to the base. So here are some pests for strawberries. Again, not exhaustive, but some of the ones that we are contending with now. Wildlife. So I present other wildlife here with strawberries just because they're so close to the ground. And, if we don't have a way to exclude our critters, they're going to come right up to our plants, eat our fruit, browse our plants right down to the base. So we're contending with plenty of mammals, our birds as well. Birds can be problematic because, they not only feed on our fruit, but they can, defecate on our plants too, which isn't appealing for our customers, right? As far as management is concerned, we have limited options. So repellents, visual, or, something that tastes bad, physically excluding them. So a deer fence would be preferable around your whole property. But again, I know that's not feasible for everyone. So some other type of exclusion, some other type of fencing, or maybe even going the route of a humane trap. All right, we got to consider all of our options.
Evan, there were a number of questions about the mulching. So
Sure.
first, what do you recommend about voles in particular? Have you seen anything work on farms where you're working?
For vole control,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, so if people are using row covers, I know that they've put baits down. But again, I don't know if those things are relisted. Um, hmm.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of traps.
Yeah, it would come down to traps. I don't know that I have a good recommendation for vol control in strawberries just because, they have that really nice dense matted row and that's just perfect for them.
Mhm.
But if we are doing our annual renovation, that can help to reduce that area a little bit. Sorry, I don't have a
Mhm.
better recommendation.
That's okay. How thick should the straw be?
Yeah, I would say around you know, 4 inches. It doesn't have to be overkill. I mean, this is really heavily mulched right here, and that'll be perfectly fine. But you don't have to go super crazy. What we're really worried about is creating a little microclimate around our crown. That mulch will hold that air there, and that air will be a little bit warmer than the air that's buzzing around up top. So that's really what we're trying to do. But I would say if you can um, clearly see your plant underneath, it's probably not enough. And if you can't see your plant at all through the straw, then it might be a little too much.
What about the row covers? Is there a certain weight that you recommend, or is it like, could you combine the two, or would that be too much insulation?
Yeah, I wouldn't combine the two just because I feel like that would even be more appealing to the critters. Um, and it would be a little bit harder to manage. So the row covers, I don't know too much about just because most of our growers are going the route of the straw mulch just because it really serves dual purpose. So you get to uncover these and then put it right in the aisle. Um, so no, I don't have a recommendation for a weight on the row covers. I'm sorry.
I guess, except for that you want it to stay above 20 degrees. So maybe
Yes.
a heavier weight, and you can look at what
Mhm.
the different weights are recommended for. Um, and then lastly, yeah, what if you cover too soon? What happens if you cover the strawberries too early?
So when you cover them too early, the plant isn't fully dormant yet or hasn't, arrested its growth enough. And then what you're doing is you're creating a warmer environment for it. So it might continue to try to grow a little bit and then, not have the light that it needs. But we want to ensure that we have that period of cool, 40 degrees for a certain amount of time, 3 days if we're looking at soil temperatures. And then based on that, we can say that our plants have gotten into a stage of growth or dormancy where they can be overwintered. So yeah, I mean, I guess the short answer would be they wouldn't fully be in their kind of winter dormant stage.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks.
All right. So again, we'll get back into our pests here. And so I present this picture because, we have a ton of foliage with strawberries. We get a ton of foliar diseases. A lot of them look the same, but, they all might have different management practices, right? So here are some examples. And then here's actually what we're looking at. So we have 4 different diseases. Leaf scorch up here, angular leaf spot, common leaf spot, and phomopsis. So it's important to be able to identify these diseases because here we have a bacterial pathogen, and then here we have fungal pathogens. So the management and the materials that you use are going to be different based on what it is. So for foliar diseases, and I'm presenting this kind of like a whole group because a lot of the management practices are going to be the same aside from those materials that we might get to at the end. But monitoring, all right? So keep an eye on the weather. If you have a weather station on your farm or a local one, check in with that one, see what the temperature is like, see what the wetting period is. And then, that can help you kind of inform when you might want to go out and scout for these things. Scouting is going to be critical. If I haven't made it clear so far, I apologize, but scouting is, again, one of your most important tools that you have, and it's super simple. All you have to do is get out there and use your eyes. But it really comes down to, keying in on those things that are important, those key identifying features. And, a lot of times it could seem like you're doing nothing. You're spending a couple hours a week walking around looking at your plants, and it might not seem like you're doing much, but trust me, just getting out there and getting some eyes on your plants is really, really going to go a long way. And then make sure you're checking all of the important areas. So for foliar diseases, we want to look at not only the foliage but the stems, the petioles, and then the sepals too around our fruit. But if we're thinking about other diseases, we want to check our canes, our shoots, and things like that. For cultural management of foliar diseases, resistant cultivars, again, so checking in with that New England guide, checking out the things, that might already be rated for resistant to some things that might be challenging for you. Removing weeds, all right, so alternate hosts, reducing our alternate hosts, increasing our airflow in our growing area. Maintaining good air circulation through our annual renovation process, that should be sufficient. Drip irrigation, delivering that water to the base of the plant, cutting down on that leaf wetness period. Using straw mulch when we can, all right? Keeping that fruit off of the ground, not predisposing them to winter injury, making them more susceptible to infection. Sanitation, so if we find something when we're scouting, remove it. Renovation I mentioned, and minimal spring nitrogen. So we don't want too much of a robust vegetative growth. Again, just giving too much of a canopy cover, and then more succulent tissues that are more susceptible to infection. And then when we do get to control, informing our control based on our scouting and based on that New England management guide. And then again, just pointing out that we might be dealing with different causal agents, either a bacteria or a fungus. So here we have anthracnose, all right? So here are some symptoms. We have this brown sunken lesion areas, soft fruit. These infections can occur in less than 24 hours, so it's really important to pay attention, again, to our weather. So if we know that we want to be out scouting for this disease, when we get up into the 80s, and we have a wetting period, that's when we want to go out and take a look. So here we have some more symptoms. Again, we have our foliar symptoms, we have our fruit symptoms, so checking multiple parts of the plant. All right, so when we're scouting, fruit symptoms will appear prior to harvest. This can also lead to crown rot and full plant collapse. It can also lead to our runners dying, so the failure of our matted row system. As far as cultural practices, and again, look at this nice long list of things that we can do before we even get to chemical control, starting with clean plant material, starting with resistant material, cleaning our equipment, avoid working in wet fields. So this is just good culture in general, all right? This can lead to compaction, drainage issues, surface water, things like that. Avoiding over-fertilization with nitrogen, again, keeping that, vegetative growth to a minimum, drip irrigation, delivering that water exactly where it needs to go, not creating the potential for these wetness periods. Rotation, so for certain diseases, we can rotate out for a certain number of years. The pathogen will hopefully peter out, die, and then we can move back in. It's really great if you're working some vegetables too with your strawberries. Just make sure you're aware of any alternate hosts. Again, that information will be provided in the New England Management Guide. Straw mulch under plants, like we talked about, between rows, just keeping a physical layer in between the source of the inoculum, which would be the soil, and your plants. Red steel. All right, so I call this a #1 strawberry disease of the past, and I call it the past because we have a lot of really good resistant varieties right now. It's a soil-borne pathogen, can survive up to 20 years. And really the only thing that you're going to notice at first is going to be stunted plants, maybe a little bit of wilting. But you'll notice something like this when the weather becomes really hot. At that point, you'd want to dig up your plant and see what's going on. And you could see some compromised roots here. You see the red center of our root here. This is not going to function at all. Managing this disease comes down to site selection. You can certainly use raised beds to help deal with this. Again, something like this is going to rely on a saturated soil to move around. Avoid compaction. And then again, just our resistant varieties. So we have some really good resistant varieties that have high fruit quality, and that's why I present this as, one of the more severe problems of the past. Now, the one that we're contending with right now, which is the biggest pain, is black root rot. So this is a disease complex, meaning that there's multiple causal agents and factors that lead to this disease presenting. Here are the symptoms, all right? So, this is a nice healthy root system, and then here we can see black root rot. We have no feeder roots. This plant might look fine for, the springtime, and it's, only going to be when it gets really warm and the plants are kind of drawing water, where we'll see these plants start to wilt and collapse. And then at that point, you'd want to dig up and see kind of what's going on. So this disease can be caused by one of these fungal pathogens, either Rhizoctonia, Pythium, or Fusarium, in combination with a nematode and in combination with plant stress. All right, so if you don't have a stressed plant, your plant's going to have this innate ability to resist this disease on its own, which is fantastic. But again, if you aren't super dialed in with your pH or your nutrition or your water, that could really predispose your plants to this disease. For management, we want to do scouting. So if we notice any wilting or flagging, scouting means checking all parts of your plant. So dig up a plant, see what the roots look like. Drainage. So if we can't rotate out for 3 to 6 years, we might need to install some drainage or consider raised beds or something like that. It really depends on your operation. But again, it really requires these 3 things working in harmony to create this pathogen. So I suspect this will continue to be a very big issue for the industry for the next few years until we figure out how we can manage it. And it's just such a challenge because we do have all of these factors. It's not like we're just controlling for one single pathogen, All right. So we do have a few minutes here, and what I want to do is just show you. I guess I can click. Okay, good. Some of these resources. Can you guys see the web page or no?
Sorry, we see a list of
Okay.
just the acronyms or yeah, not the.
All right. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up all these pages and then share something different. But if you have any questions about the strawberries, I'll take those while I'm pulling up these resources.
There was a question about apps that folks could use for identifying diseases.
Hmm.
I don't
So
know of any.
yeah, I don't know of any really good ones. So I can't give you a recommendation. My guess would be that they aren't where they need to be. And I think that using a good old-fashioned field guide is going to be your best option. And we have field guides that are specific to each crop type. And then here, I'm going to share with you. Yep. So we should see. Do you see my browser now?
Yep,
Great. All right. So this is one of the
it's
field guides. Oops, sorry, go ahead.
it's just that's very small.
Oh, it is very small.
If you can zoom in, or I can put the link in the chat too.
Is that a little better?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, yeah. So this is a great little field guide. This is from the APS. I mean, it's fairly expensive, but it is for strawberry, raspberry, and blueberry, and it covers beneficials, it covers insect pests, and diseases as well. So again, this is what I use in my fruit production course. Sorry about that. And I think that this is an excellent resource. So
Cool.
this is the NUA website, if you're not familiar with it, and you will have access to your Massachusetts one. But I just wanted to show you the different tools that are available here. So you pick your closest weather station. So that's going to be stores for me. And what I want to highlight is these crop management or pest management tools. So we have a lot for tree fruit. So if you're growing tree fruit, that's perfectly fine. But here's that blueberry maggot model. Again, we'd come in here and this is telling us, our current degree days. So, we have very low risk for this pest. We have an apple irrigation model, strawberry disease models. So again, this is taking into consideration temperature and leaf wetness for botrytis and anthracnose, two of those diseases I showed you. And again, you would just pick the station closest to you and you would get this information right away. The next thing I want to show you is the New England Management Guide. So this is the landing page here. And we have, our menu over here. So for something like strawberries, we'll go in. We have a lot of really good general information. Some general information about pH, organic matter, what is going to be the desirable range for our macronutrients, some spacing, some critical temperatures, foliar nutrient analysis levels again. So that information that you're getting from your lab, you could compare here and see if you are within range. Let's see. So we have some disease descriptions. And then here we go. This is one of the main things I want to show you. All right, so here we have our strawberry cultivar descriptions. Okay, so we have all of our cultivars here. We have seasons, so when they flower and fruit. We have hardiness zone. We have resistant to all these diseases. We even have a sulfur sensitivity. All right, so if we have an idea about some things that we might want to be growing, we could just check with this and say, hey, I'm going to go with AC Wendy because it's partially resistant to all three of these major diseases. The other thing I wanted to show you here is this next table. This is an efficacy table for different materials for fungicides. So this is kind of the things that we were asking about. Anything that is denoted with a leaf is an OMRI listed material. And then here we can see that we have rated everything for its efficacy against all of these different pathogens. All right, so we're able to make informed decisions about what we're using, not just picking a organic material, but also picking one that's going to be effective for what we're managing. The next thing that I wanted to show you was this website, Great Lakes IPM. So this is where I get all of our monitoring and trapping supplies. So everything is organized by crop type and pest type, and you can just search the pests that you're looking for. It'll give you the traps, the lures, and you can get these in smaller quantities too, like 10 per case, which is just great. There's nothing to say that you can't be taking advantage and using these types of things. And then again, that just brings us back to the APS website. If you are growing just one crop, say you're just a strawberry grower or a blueberry grower, you might want to invest in one of these compendiums. So these are really in-depth looks at all of the strawberry diseases. They're a little expensive. They might be like a couple $100, but there's really, really high quality images. And using that in tandem with the ID guide is really going to help ID your pests and help you kind of make more informed decisions. So that was the last of the resources that I wanted to share with you. And I'm sorry I don't know more about specific organic production, but I hope that through taking a look at some of these diseases and the different type of IPM that we would employ, that you have a better idea of what you can do on your farm. And if nothing else, you have a bunch of new resources that you can explore. But yeah, so if you have any last minute questions, I'd be happy to answer them. And if not, thank you so much for hanging out.
Awesome. Thank you, Evan. Yeah, tons of good information there. Any other questions from folks? I think we went through most of them as we went along, and if there are any more, feel free to put them in the chat or even just unmute yourself and speak up. Well, there's a lot of information there and more. I really appreciate all the resources because yeah, it's good to know where to go to get more information on your own. Knowledge is power.
Yeah, and so I use all of these resources in my daily job, all right, because I don't just have everything up here. No one does, despite what some people might try to convince you of. So these are all resources that extension professionals are using, and these are all really high quality sources. So
If there are some insect or disease pests that have alternate hosts, where would you find that information?
So that alternate host information will be listed either in the New England Management Guide. It could be listed in the compendium guides, and then potentially also in that ID guide. It really depends on the specific. So some pests might be more well established, and there might be a little bit more information on their alternate hosts. But again, if you just want to hit Google search, as long as you're putting site.edu after your search, you can kind of filter out all of that nonsense, and it will bring you right to some extension web pages. And yeah, site.edu, perfect.
I just learned about that like 1 year ago.
Oh wow, yeah.
Yeah. So it'll show you like extension or university sites. So filtering out some of the, vastness of the internet. Are there any companion planting ideas that you have? Like for one example, rhubarb with blueberries or
So I don't know much about companion planting. I'm sorry to say. Other than that, anything that you can do to encourage your pollinators. So you want to be as successful as you can. So if you have food sources for your pollinators throughout the whole season, beyond just what your cash crop is providing you, that's always a good companion.
Are bumblebees the main pollinators of these crops, or honeybees or other pollinators?
So blueberries are primarily pollinated by bumblebees, and I just found out this year that they're primarily only pollinated by queens. Um, so yeah, and Dr. Kelsey Fisher at the Connecticut Experiment Station, she's been doing research on that. But the other crops that we've talked about rely on our native bees, our honeybees, our sonicating bees, things like that.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, there might also be some other like native insects that pollinate them as well, but I'm not super familiar.
Okay, well, I don't see any more questions, and we're a little over time, so I want to respect everyone's time, including yours. And thank you again, Evan, for putting this together. It was really informative.
Yeah, thanks for having me anytime. All the best.
Cool, thanks. Well, enjoy the rest of this beautiful day, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, we'll see you.
Bye-bye.